Dr. Hannah Kim had been watching the stars for 15 years, but she had never seen anything like this. Her deep space monitoring station floated quietly at the very edge of human territory, where space became truly empty and dark. Most days were boring, just checking readings and making sure nothing dangerous was heading toward Earth's colonies. But today was different. The massive object appeared on her screens like a ghost materializing from nowhere. It was huge, bigger than any spaceship humanity had ever built, drifting silently through the void between star systems. At first, Kim thought it might be a dead asteroid or some natural space debris. But as her instruments got a better look, she realized this was something else entirely. The thing was clearly artificial. Its surface was covered in strange patterns and what looked like weapon ports, though they were unlike anything in human or alien design. The metal itself seemed to absorb light in ways that hurt to look at. When Kim's team sent a small probe to investigate, the ancient systems suddenly came to life. Energy readings spiked off the charts. The construct's power output was so massive that Kim's instruments couldn't even measure it properly. The technology was completely beyond anything humanity understood, and according to the Galactic Empire's databases, it was beyond their knowledge too. This thing was older than any known civilization in the galaxy. Kim felt her hands shake as she realized what they had found. This wasn't just some old spaceship or abandoned station. The weapon systems that were now powering up could probably destroy entire planets. The energy patterns suggested technology that could bend space and time itself. Whatever species had built this thing, they were far more advanced than anyone alive today. She immediately sent emergency transmissions to both human command on Earth and the nearest Galactic Empire outpost. Her message was simple, but terrifying. They had found something that could kill every living thing in space. The construct was clearly a weapon designed for mass destruction, and now it was waking up after who knows how many thousands of years of sleep. Kim watched nervously as more systems activated across the massive structure. Lights that hadn't shone for millennia began to glow with an eerie blue radiance. Strange sounds echoed through space, picked up by her sensors. The construct was scanning the surrounding area, learning about current technology levels and civilization patterns. As she waited for responses to her warnings, Kim couldn't shake the feeling that humanity had just awakened something that should have stayed buried forever. The reading showed this was just one construct, but if there were others like it scattered across the galaxy, every spacefaring species was in terrible danger. She had discovered what might be the greatest threat the galaxy had ever faced, and she prayed someone would listen to her warnings before it was too late. Commander Ji-won Park barely looked up from his desk when the human transmission arrived at the Imperial outpost. He was busy reviewing reports about trade disputes between core worlds, the kind of important work that kept the Galactic Empire running smoothly. When his aide mentioned an urgent message from humanity's monitoring station, Park actually rolled his eyes. Humans were the Empire's newest members, having joined just 50 years ago when they finally developed faster-than-light travel. To most Imperial citizens, they were still practically cavemen playing with fire. Their technology was centuries behind Imperial standards. Their ships were small and weak, and their understanding of galactic politics was laughably simple. Now they were claiming to have found something that the Empire's greatest scientists couldn't identify. Park played the message and watched Dr. Kim's worried face explaining her discovery. Ancient construct, unprecedented energy readings, existential threat to all spacefaring life. He had heard it all before, from dozens of species who thought every old piece of space junk was some galaxy-ending superweapon. The Empire had been exploring space for over 1,000 years. If there was something dangerous out there, they would have found it long ago. Faulty sensors, Park muttered to his aide. These humans still use primitive detection equipment. They probably found an old Imperial probe from centuries ago, and their instruments are giving them crazy readings. The aide nodded in agreement. Everyone knew human technology was unreliable. Their ships broke down constantly. Their weapons were barely effective against Imperial shields, and their scientists were always making wild claims based on incomplete data. Just last year, a human research team had declared they found evidence of time travel, only to discover their calculations were completely wrong. When more urgent messages arrived from Earth's leadership, Park grew annoyed. These humans were persistent. He had to give them that. But persistence didn't make their claims any more credible. The Empire's xenoarchaeologists reviewed the energy readings Kim had sent and quickly dismissed them as sensor malfunctions. The patterns didn't match anything in Imperial databases because they weren't real. Park's superiors were even less impressed. High Command was dealing with real problems: rebellions in the Outer Rim, trade negotiations with the powerful merchant guilds, and political tensions between core worlds. They didn't have time to chase after every false alarm from humanity's backwater colonies. The official Imperial response was crafted carefully to sound diplomatic while making their position clear. They would investigate the human claims when time and resources permit, but current priorities required their attention elsewhere. In other words, they would get around to it eventually, maybe next year if nothing more important came up. Park sent the message and immediately forgot about it. He had real work to do, and the Empire had survived for a millennium without taking advice from species who had barely learned to leave their home planets. Whatever the humans thought they had found, it couldn't possibly be as dangerous as they claimed. Admiral Minho Lee stared at the Imperial response message with growing anger. After 20 years of military service, he had learned to read between the lines of diplomatic language. The Empire was basically telling humanity to shut up and go away. They were on their own. Lee immediately called an emergency meeting with Earth's Defense Council. The room was tense as he explained the situation. Humanity's entire space fleet consisted of only 47 ships, most of them small patrol vessels and cargo haulers converted for military use. Against an unknown alien superweapon, they might as well be throwing rocks. But Lee wasn't about to let his people die without a fight. Within hours, evacuation orders went out to every human colony in the outer systems. Families packed their belongings into cargo ships, while children asked why they had to leave their homes so suddenly. The lucky ones made it to transport vessels. Others would have to take their chances in small personal shuttles, hoping they could reach the inner colonies before whatever was coming caught up with them. Meanwhile, Dr. Kim's research team worked around the clock to understand what they were facing. As they dug deeper into the construct's databases, the truth became terrifyingly clear. This wasn't just some ancient weapon left behind by a dead civilization, it was something much worse. The construct was a harvester, designed specifically to hunt down and eliminate spacefaring species. Dr. Kim discovered there were thousands of them scattered throughout the galaxy, all connected through some kind of quantum network. They had been dormant for tens of thousands of years, waiting for the right moment to activate. That moment came when galactic civilization reached what the harvesters considered a dangerous level of technological development. Too many species, flying around in space, building weapons, expanding their territories. When the network detected this critical mass of spacefaring activity, all the harvesters would wake up simultaneously and begin their work. The scariest part was how methodical they were. These machines didn't just destroy randomly. They studied their targets first, learning about current technology and military tactics. Every ship they destroyed, every colony they wiped out, gave them more information about how to fight the galaxy's defenders. Human engineers worked desperately to find some kind of defense. Chief Engineer Daiho Jung led teams that stripped apart their ships and rebuilt them with improvised armor and shield modifications. They didn't really understand how the harvesters' weapons worked, but they tried everything they could think of. Some ships got extra layers of hull plating. Others were fitted with experimental energy dispersal systems that might help scatter incoming attacks. A few vessels were equipped with quantum scramblers, devices that could theoretically interfere with alien targeting systems. None of it was tested, and most of it probably wouldn't work. But it was better than facing the harvester with standard equipment. As the evacuation continued and ships were hastily modified, everyone knew they were buying time at best. The harvester was coming, and humanity's small fleet would have to face it alone. The harvester's transformation was both beautiful and terrifying to watch. What had looked like an ancient, dead hulk began to unfold like a massive metal flower. Sections of its hull shifted and rotated. revealing weapon systems that glowed with an inner light that seemed to bend reality around them. Within minutes, the construct had become a perfect sphere nearly 10 kilometers across, its surface covered in thousands of weapon ports that pulsed with deadly energy. Captain Young-Ho Kim was commanding the defense of Kepler Station when the Harvester arrived. His small patrol ship, the Busan, was one of 12 vessels trying to protect the mining colony. They had evacuated most of the civilians, but 3,000 workers were still trapped on the station's lower levels when the alien weapon appeared on their scanners. "All ships, maintain formation," Kim ordered, though his voice was steadier than he felt. "Remember, we just need to buy time for the last transports to get clear." The Harvester didn't waste time with warnings or negotiations. Its first shot was aimed at the station's main power core. The weapon that fired didn't look like anything Kim had ever seen. Instead of an energy beam or missile, space itself seemed to twist and fold around the target. The station's shields, which could normally deflect asteroid impacts, simply vanished as if they had never existed. The power core exploded, taking half the station with it. In seconds, 3,000 people were gone, along with the colony that had taken decades to build. Kim watched in horror as the wreckage scattered into space, some pieces seeming to fade out of existence entirely. "Open fire," Kim shouted, and 12 human ships unleashed everything they had. Plasma cannons, missile volleys, and experimental railguns all targeted the massive sphere. Their weapons hit the Harvester's hull and simply disappeared, absorbed into the alien metal without leaving so much as a scorch mark. The Harvester's response was methodical and devastating. One by one, it targeted each human ship with those reality-bending weapons. Captain Lee's destroyer simply ceased to exist, not destroyed but erased, as if it had never been built. Lieutenant Park's frigate was twisted into impossible shapes before, being compressed into a ball of metal no bigger than a basketball. Kim's ship was one of the last to die. As the space-twisting weapon reached toward the Busan, he managed to send one final transmission back to Earth. "It's learning from every ship it destroys. Each attack makes it smarter. God help us all." Meanwhile, desperate calls flooded Imperial communication networks. Human ambassadors begged for help, sending video footage of the Harvester's attacks and pleading for immediate military assistance. But Imperial Command was focused on what they considered more pressing matters. Her trade dispute between two core worlds had escalated into armed conflict, and suppressing rebellions in the Outer Rim was considered far more important than investigating human hysteria. The Harvester moved methodically from target to target, each destroyed outpost teaching it more about humanity's weapons, tactics, and technology. It was preparing for something much bigger. Dr. Hana Kim hadn't slept in 3 days. Her eyes burned as she stared at the data streaming from the Harvester's databases, but she couldn't look away. What she was discovering would change everything humanity thought they knew about the galaxy. The Harvester wasn't trying to hide its information. In fact, it seemed almost proud of its work, storing detailed records of every civilization it had encountered over the millennia. Kim's translation programs worked frantically to decode the alien data, and with each file that opened, the horror grew deeper. "Xianwu, come look at this," Kim called to her research assistant. Dr. Xianwu Choi hurried over, his face pale from exhaustion and stress. Together they watched as the Harvester's files revealed the galaxy's darkest secret. 50,000 years ago, there had been an empire that spanned half the galaxy. Their ships were powered by captured stars, and they could create entire planets from raw energy. The records showed cities floating in space that were larger than Earth's moon, with billions of inhabitants living in perfect harmony with technology that seemed like magic. The Harvesters had erased them completely. "Look at this one," Kim whispered, opening another file. This civilization had mastered time travel, moving their cities through different dimensions to avoid war and disease. They had eliminated aging and could transfer their consciousness between bodies. They were essentially immortal gods compared to current galactic species. The Harvesters had hunted them down across multiple timelines. File after file revealed the same pattern. Every 50,000 years, when galactic civilization reached a certain level of advancement, the Harvester network would activate. They would systematically eliminate every spacefaring species, destroying their worlds, their knowledge, and their very existence. Only primitive species on backwater planets would survive, left to slowly evolve and rebuild civilization from scratch. "How many times has this happened?" Choi asked, his voice barely a whisper. Kim's hands shook as she counted. "The records. 17 complete cycles. We're looking at the 18th. The most terrifying part was how efficient the system was. The harvesters didn't just kill randomly. They studied each civilization carefully, learning their strengths and weaknesses before striking. They would start with isolated outposts and smaller species, gathering intelligence while the major powers ignored the threat. By the time the great empires realized what was happening, the harvesters had learned everything they needed to know about current military technology and tactics. The current Galactic Empire, which considered itself the pinnacle of advancement, was actually one of the most primitive civilizations the harvesters had ever faced. Previous empires had weapons that could destroy entire star systems, defenses that spanned multiple dimensions, and technologies that the current galaxy couldn't even imagine. All of them had fallen to the harvesters. Kim realized with growing horror that humanity had accidentally triggered the current cycle. When they joined the Galactic Empire 50 years ago, they had pushed the total number of spacefaring species over the critical threshold. The Harvester Network had detected this milestone and begun its awakening process. "We need to warn everyone," Kim said. But even as she spoke, she knew it was probably too late. The pattern was already in motion, and history was about to repeat itself for the 18th time. Admiral Kexhan Vel had commanded Imperial fleets for 3 decades and had never lost a battle. His flagship, the Eternal Dominion, was the most powerful warship in the galaxy, armed with weapons that could crack planets and shields that had never been breached. When reports reached him about some ancient construct destroying human outposts, he had dismissed it as typical human incompetence. That confidence evaporated in seconds when the Harvester materialized in the Centauri Prime system, home to the Empire's Third Fleet. "All stations, this is Admiral Vel," he announced over the fleet communication system. "Unknown vessel, you are trespassing in Imperial space. Surrender immediately or face the consequences." The Harvester's response was to target the nearby Harmony Station, a massive orbital facility that housed 50,000 Imperial citizens and served as a major military depot. The space-bending weapon fired, and Vel watched in disbelief as the station's legendary shield simply ceased to exist. The entire structure, built with the Empire's most advanced technology, was compressed into a ball of twisted metal before vanishing completely. "Impossible," Vel whispered. "Harmony Station had shields that could withstand supernova-level energy bursts. Its defenses had been tested against every known weapon in the galaxy. Nothing should have been able to penetrate them so easily." "Admiral, the Titan's Wrath and the Star Crusher are moving to engage," his tactical officer reported. These were the Empire's newest dreadnoughts, each one carrying enough firepower to sterilize entire worlds. Vel watched as his greatest warships opened fire. The combined barrage would have reduced any known vessel to atoms, but the Harvester absorbed the attack without even slowing down. Its hull didn't show so much as a scratch from weapons that could destroy entire fleets. The Harvester's counterattack was swift and terrible. The Titan's Wrath, a ship that had conquered a dozen worlds, simply twisted out of existence as space folded around it. The Star Crusher lasted a few seconds longer before its massive bulk was compressed into a sphere no bigger than a shuttle. "Sir, we're receiving emergency transmissions from Nexus Base and the Crimson Citadel," his communications officer called out, panic creeping into his voice. "They're under attack by identical constructs." Vel felt his blood freeze. 3 of the Empire's most important military installations were being hit simultaneously by these ancient weapons. These weren't random attacks. This was a coordinated assault by multiple Harvesters working together. Within 4 hours, the Empire's 3rd, 7th and 9th fleets had been completely destroyed. Over 300 warships, including the most advanced vessels in Imperial service, had been reduced to space dust. Military installations that had stood for centuries were gone, along with nearly 2 million Imperial personnel. The reports, flooding into Imperial command, painted a picture of complete helplessness. The Empire's doctrine of overwhelming firepower, which had dominated galactic warfare for 1,000 years, was useless against technology that treated their strongest, weapons like minor annoyances. Emperor Zarketh himself called an emergency session of the War Council. For the first time in Imperial history, their military leaders had no answers. The humans had been right, and the Empire's arrogance had cost them dearly. But that meant accepting that their primitive newest members understood threats that Imperial intelligence had completely missed. The Imperial War Council chamber had never seen anything like it. For the first time in 1,000 years, the Empire's greatest military minds sat in stunned silence while a human captain explained how to fight an enemy that had destroyed their finest fleets in hours. Captain Sunho Choi stood before the massive, holographic display, his simple human uniform looking almost primitive next to the elaborate dress of Imperial admirals. But nobody was laughing at humanity's technology anymore. Choi's small patrol ship, the Soul, was one of only 3 vessels to survive direct combat with a harvester, and right now that made him the most experienced combat pilot in the galaxy. The key is not to think like we're fighting a normal enemy, Choi explained, highlighting sections of combat footage on the display. These harvesters learn from every attack. Every ship they destroy teaches them something new about our weapons and tactics. Admiral Vell, still shaken from losing his entire fleet, leaned forward. But your ships are so much weaker than ours. How did you survive when our dreadnoughts were destroyed instantly? Choi smiled grimly. Because we're weaker. Our weapons don't interest the harvester as much, so it doesn't study us as carefully. And we've been modifying our ships with improvised countermeasures for weeks, while you were ignoring our warnings. The captain demonstrated by showing how human engineers had modified their ship's shield frequencies to rapid cycle through different energy patterns. It wasn't elegant, and it used enormous amounts of power, but it seemed to confuse the harvester's targeting systems just enough to buy precious seconds of survival time. We've also discovered that their space-bending weapons have a brief charging period, Choi continued. If you can detect the energy buildup and change your ship's position in those 2 seconds, you might survive the first shot. Emperor Zarketh himself entered the chamber, something that hadn't happened during a military briefing in decades. His ornate robes couldn't hide the fear in his ancient eyes. Captain Choi, what do your people need from us? Industrial capacity, Choi replied without hesitation. We have ideas, but we can't build enough ships or weapons to make a difference. You have the factories and resources. We have the knowledge of how to fight these things. Within hours, the most unlikely alliance in galactic history was forming. Human engineers worked alongside Imperial scientists in massive shipyards, combining crude but effective human modifications with advanced Imperial manufacturing techniques. Dr. Kim found herself explaining harvester technology to scientists who had previously dismissed her as a primitive researcher. The harvester's quantum network is their weakness, Kim explained to a room full of Imperial physicists. If we can disrupt their communication with each other, they become individual threats instead of a coordinated network. Commander Isel Park, leading the Joint Tactical Planning Committee, outlined their desperate strategy. Human ships would serve as scouts and harassment units, using their survival modifications to gather intelligence. Imperial vessels would be retrofitted with human countermeasures and deployed as heavy support. It wasn't much of a plan, but it was the galaxy's only hope. 2 species that had barely respected each other were now betting everything on working together. Lieutenant Yunbi Song had always been good with impossible problems. As humanity's top theoretical physicist, she'd spent years figuring out how to make their primitive technology work alongside advanced alien systems. But this problem was different. She was trying to find a way to kill something that had survived for millions of years. The breakthrough came at 3 in the morning while she was analyzing the quantum signatures from destroyed harvesters. Song noticed something strange in the data patterns. Every harvester they'd encountered showed identical quantum fluctuations, as if they were all connected to the same source. Dr. Kim, you need to see this, Song called across the research lab. Kim hurried over, her eyes red from weeks of sleepless nights. Look at these readings, Song pointed to her screen. The harvesters aren't independent. They're all receiving instructions from somewhere else, somewhere that exists in a pocket dimension folded into normal space. Kim studied the data and felt her heart race. A command node. If we could find it and destroy it, the entire network would go offline, Song finished. But there's a problem. The pocket dimension is surrounded by space-time distortions that would tear apart any normal ship trying to approach it. The Imperial scientists were skeptical when Song presented her findings. How could humans detect something that Imperial sensors couldn't even see? But the math was solid and they were running out of options. 3 more star systems had fallen to the harvesters in the past week. Song's plan was insane. They would need to modify human ships with experimental dimensional drives, essentially turning them into flying bombs. The ships would carry Imperial quantum torpedoes, weapons so powerful they could crack moons, directly into the pocket dimension. The space-time distortions would destroy conventional Imperial vessels instantly, but human ships were smaller and more maneuverable. They might survive long enough to deliver their payload. How many ships would we need? Admiral Lee asked during the planning session. 12, Song replied quietly. And we'd need volunteer crews. The dimensional stresses will probably kill everyone on board before they can even fire their weapons. The room fell silent. They were asking people to fly suicide missions into a place that existed outside normal reality. Captain Jihoon Kang was the first to volunteer. He'd lost his entire squadron to a harvester attack and wanted revenge. Soon, 11 other captains stepped forward. They knew the odds, but they also knew what would happen if the harvesters weren't stopped. Song worked around the clock to modify the ships. Human vessels were stripped down to bare essentials and fitted with experimental shields designed to resist dimensional shearing. Imperial quantum torpedoes were mounted in place of normal weapons, each one powerful enough to destabilize the pocket dimension. The entry window will only be open for 30 seconds, Song explained to the volunteer pilots. You'll need to navigate through space-time storms that will try to stretch your ships across multiple dimensions. If you can reach the command node and detonate the torpedoes simultaneously, the quantum cascade should collapse the entire network. As the 12 ships prepared for launch, everyone knew this was their last chance. If the mission failed, nothing would stop the harvesters from completing their ancient cycle of galactic extinction. Captain Jihoon Kang felt his ship shaking apart around him as it plunged through the dimensional barrier. The Soul's hull groaned, under stresses that shouldn't exist, and his instruments showed readings that made no sense. Space itself was twisted into impossible shapes, with stars appearing to exist in multiple locations at once. All ships maintain formation, Kang's voice crackled over the comm system, though he wasn't sure if his words were reaching the other 11 volunteers. Time moved strangely here, and he could see the ghostly outlines of his fellow pilots' ships flickering in and out of existence. Then they saw it, the command node floating in the center of the pocket dimension, like a massive crystal heart. It pulsed with energy that connected to every harvester in the galaxy, sending out instructions that had guided the extinction of countless civilizations. Lieutenant Song's calculations had been perfect. Remember, we all fire together, Kang said, arming his quantum torpedo. Around him, the other ships did the same, their weapons glowing with Imperial technology that had been redesigned by human ingenuity. For everyone they killed, Captain Minji Lee whispered over the comm. For everyone we're going to save, added Captain Dongwon Kim. 12 quantum torpedoes fired simultaneously, each one carrying enough destructive power to shatter a planet. The command node's defenses, designed to stop conventional attacks, couldn't handle weapons delivered by ships that existed partially outside normal spacetime. The crystal structure cracked, then shattered, sending cascading failures through the quantum network. Throughout the galaxy, harvesters that had been systematically destroying worlds suddenly stopped mid-attack. Their coordination failed, their targeting systems went offline, and one by one they entered emergency dormancy protocols. The ancient network that had ended 17 galactic civilizations finally fell silent. Of the 12 volunteer pilots, only 3 survived the mission. Their ships limped back to normal space, badly damaged but alive. Captain Kang spent 2 months in medical treatment, but he lived to see the galaxy begin to rebuild. The aftermath was devastating to witness. Entire star systems were gone, reduced, to debris fields by harvester weapons. Billions of people from dozens of species were dead. The Galactic Empire's military was in ruins, their greatest fleets destroyed in a matter of days. Colonial worlds that had thrived for centuries were now empty graveyards floating in space. But from the ashes of near extinction came something unprecedented. Emperor Zarketh himself traveled to Earth to formally apologize to humanity's leadership. The Empire's arrogance had nearly cost the galaxy everything, while humanity's willingness to investigate the unknown had saved everyone. The Imperial government restructured completely. Human advisors joined the highest levels of command, bringing their curious nature and innovative thinking to species that had grown comfortable with their superiority. Dr. Kim was appointed director of the new Galactic Early Warning System, with resources and authority that no human had ever possessed. In her new office overlooking Earth's capital, Kim studied reports from deep space monitoring stations now placed throughout the galaxy. She knew the harvesters were only dormant, not destroyed. Somewhere in the vast cosmos, other ancient threats waited for civilizations foolish enough to ignore warnings from those they considered beneath them. The galaxy had learned a hard lesson about the price of hubris, but Kim wondered if they would remember it when the next crisis emerged.